Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. I'm Maya Soma, and I'm here with Bhante Subdaso to my right and Bhante Jay to my left. And welcome to a couple of friends that are checking in. Hello to Andres, Rick, Kumu, Jerry, Geeta. Good to see you. I met you in person. It was lovely. A couple of days ago. Frank, TJ, Karen. And we have a few questions also from this morning. Rick also has a question from the teaching of this morning. So Rick asks, this question is related to the discussion on LGBTQIA plus identities. Many Dhamma teachers say that we must first have a healthy sense of self before we can let go of the self. Any reflections? Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. That's actually kind of what I was referring to this morning when I quoted also Bhante Sujato's suggestion of Buddhism starts when psychology ends. That's essentially what it means, to get to a place where we're comfortable, more or less. I mean, not extremely comfortable, because that will take countless lifetimes, and we've done that already, but at least not in extreme discomfort with our sense of self. And then once we are in a kind of average self-hatred, maybe. I'm kidding. Just an average sort of, understanding of the self, then we can let go of it. This is my thoughts anyway. Maybe the other venerables have something to say.
I think that's pretty accurate.
It's good. Yeah. And I'll also take, or maybe actually, let's get here to. Oh, hello, Mary. Good to see you. And TJ says, has a quote from the Dhammapada 160. Atta hi attano nato. Truly oneself is one's own protector. How do we connect the dot between the concept of self-reliance and not self? Actually, since Bhante Sudaso translated Dhammapada, maybe I'll pass it on to you, Venerable.
Yeah, so it's important to recognize that the word atta has two usages in Pali. So one is the sense of one's eternal soul, one's permanent self, permanent self-identity, permanent self-status. And that was what the Buddha rejected. But the other use of the word atta is just a perfectly ordinary way that we say, for example, oh, I did it by myself. Just a perfectly ordinary way that we use the word self in ordinary speech. So in the case of the Dhammapada verse that you're quoting, that's an example of it being used in the perfectly ordinary way. So atta hi attano nato. What this is saying is that ultimately, if we want to transform ourselves, if we want to make progress on the path, then we can't rely upon an external being to do it for us. It's something that we do for ourselves. And similarly, if we want to have good luck and good fortune in our lives, then you generate good karma by making good actions. And that's what will bring safety and good luck to you. So it's just talking here in a very ordinary way about the cause and effect relationship that we generate through making intentional choices. And of course, you can also make choices that will lead to realizing the absence of a ultimate self or true self or eternal soul. So realizing anatta, which then can lead to complete awakening. Okay.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And Frank asks, is there a nikaya that lay people should spend more time with than the others? Bhante Jay?
Well, I mean, traditionally it's said that the Anguttara Nikaya is more geared towards lay people. But other than that, I wouldn't necessarily give any one over the other. I mean, I'm personally partial to the Samyutta Nikaya, so I talk about it all the time. I think it's the best. But and many teachers will say that the Majjhima Nikaya is good for people, laity, or people who are kind of newer. But yeah, I guess if you want to go with the traditional understanding of the Anguttara Nikaya being very, very heavily layperson focused, then go with the Anguttara Nikaya.
Great.
And there's also one from the Digha Nikaya, the Sigala Vada Sutta, which is sometimes called the layperson's Vinaya. So it's a fairly detailed sutta on advice for lay people in specific.
As Bhante is fond of saying, lay people should read all of the suttas.
Yeah.
Not just one.
Yes, completely. I think we all agree on that one. We might not agree with everything, but we agree with that one. And I have actually 3 questions from this morning, so that we didn't have time to cover. So since I noted them, I'll go to them right now. So one of them, I think this was from Daniel. Daniel had said, I can't define gender, yet I'd like to use it as a conventional label without clinging. How can I define myself without attachment if I don't know what the label means? It's not just physical. Well, I would say, actually, as we were saying this morning, rather than us necessarily trying to find all these definitions by ourselves and doing the work all by ourselves, actually looking at the teachings of the Buddha, looking at the Dhamma to kind of find, and not necessarily by that, I mean, not the commentaries, but I mean, actually the suttas without the commentaries, they actually give us some really insightful pointers where to direct the mind and to investigate. What kind of tools can we use to investigate what these labels are and what they mean for ourselves? And so the Samyoga Sutta, I think it's actually extremely, as I mentioned this morning, extremely important and extremely fundamental, because none of the things that the Buddha says that we attach to when we're describing either the feminine or the masculine have to do with the physical. But rather, it's a mental process. Rather, it's different constructions. So when we see what he's pointing out, then we can actually use that framework for ourselves. And I feel like then we can, of course, use conventional labels without clinging, because we totally understand that we're using, I define this as a glass, and I'm not really clinging too much to the definition of this glass. It's just very simple. It's a way to communicate what this object is with other friends, rather than going, oh, well, it's this transparent object that serves a purpose of putting water into it, blah, 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 and becomes like very clunky the way that we can communicate with others. But rather we're like, okay, this is a glass. And maybe I define it once and everybody's on board and we have an easy kind of way of communicating. So this is what comes to mind, but maybe the other venerables, no? Then there was a question that went, where is our gender identity located? Which of the 5 aggregates?
Yeah, similarly, I'd say it's located in the 4 mental aggregates. If you were to place it mainly in one, it would be under Sankara, in my opinion. But there's traces of it also in Sanya. But I'd say it's predominantly a Sankara of the 4 mental khandhas.
And the last one from this morning that I had written down was, how does Guanyin sometimes get portrayed as a male and sometimes as a female?
Well, Guanyin, one of the characteristics of a high-level bodhisattva is that they can appear in whatever form is most helpful to people. So that means sometimes appearing as male and sometimes as female and sometimes as something else, depending upon what is most helpful or most relevant. So a bodhisattva does not have a fixed gender, but rather they use whatever appearance is helpful and relevant to that particular circumstance. So Guanyin is not a man or a woman. Guanyin is just Guanyin, and will appear as either male or female or otherwise, depending upon the needs of the moment.
Actually, thank you, Bhante, there is actually also this beautiful Mahayana Sutra that I don't quite remember the details, but overall it's basically Guanyin Avalokiteshvara talking to Sariputta, that is a little bit vilified in the Mahayana sutras here and there, which can trigger us Theravada aficionados. But in this situation, Sariputta is very much attached to his gender identity, and so Avalokiteshvara is manifesting as a woman, and they trade. At a certain point, all of a sudden, Sariputta is a woman, and Avalokiteshvara is male, and essentially the reason why Avalokiteshvara reassigned essentially the sex or the gender, however we want to interpret it, was to essentially prove a point to Sariputta of how essentially impermanent and interchangeable the element of gender is. Anyway, very fascinating. I don't remember it that well because it's been a while now. Do you remember the second?
I remember the story, but not the source.
Yeah. And Jerry says, greetings, Venerables. Please describe the proper way to regard harshness, resistance so as to refuse to feed ill will, because my metta practice is really suffering. Bhante Jay?
And I was looking at this, and I think that this question needs a bit more context. I mean, describe the proper way to regard harshness or resistance in yourself, in others, in specific contexts, and maybe you're dealing with specific issues, and that's your metta is being struggling because of this. So it's like I think for a more full answer, I would need more context. But I think it always comes down to wisdom, right? This always comes down to, I always tell the story of how, because when I was in lay life, my metta was powerful. I felt it really strong, and I became a monastic, and it just kind of died. The feeling of it and all this stuff. And I remember asking Bhante Ji, and I said, I was telling him the story, and he looked at me and he said, until you see impermanence at a deeper level, your metta will only be skin deep. Right? So if you're like, oh, I'm really good at metta, and then all of a sudden you deal with somebody has resistance towards you or harshness or whatever, and then your metta goes away, your metta is only skin deep. Right? The harshness and resistance are part of human nature. This is part of, you're going to deal with this, right? Especially if you see the causes and conditions that lead towards that harshness and resistance arising. Like, you decide, well, out of metta, I'm going to say that this person should X, Y, and Z. And you go up and say, oh, X, Y, Z. And then they put their defenses up, and then there's resistance. And you wonder, well, why are they resisting? I'm trying to give them this with metta, So metta is, true deep metta comes from wisdom and insight. Right? It doesn't matter resistance, harshness, whoever you could have metta. When I give metta retreats, I always like to throw in this thing, and I do it in a way to see the shock value on people's faces. And I'll say something like, "Can you have metta for Hitler?" And I see people go, and then I explain why. It's like the Buddha teaches us that all beings, right, in samsara have done all kinds of good and bad, things. And metta is for all beings without distinction, without classification, without discrimination. So even somebody has harshness or resistance towards you or brings that up, then you still practice metta, right? If your metta is going away because somebody is being harsh or resistant towards you, then your metta is only skin deep, and that's okay. It's not, that's perfectly fine. But it's just, it shows you that your metta is also anicca, right? Metta is still subject to the three characteristics of existence. Right? Metta is impermanent. Metta is dukkha. Metta is not self. Right? So this is, I guess the best I can answer this question without context.
Right, thank you, Bhante. And Frank says, I'd like to learn more about members of the Arya Sangha. Do you know of any sources besides the Teri, Tiragata, and Bhikkhu Bodhi's compilation?
Actually, there's that book, Great Disciples of the Buddha.
Helmuth Heckler.
Yeah,
his name
there's
is. Yeah.
and Bhante Analayo also did a similar book, but I don't remember the name.
There's lots. I mean, if you put Buddhist monastics books, there's lots of material out there. Alice Collett, I know, is, for example, a scholar who has written many both articles and books, actually, on the Teris in particular. Probably also on the Teras, but I kind of ignored those. But on the Teris for sure. And she works a lot with Bhante Analayo. And Rick says, in 2013, after 34 years of hiding my Buddhist practice, I made it clear that I'm a dedicated Buddhist practitioner. Friends rejected me, my family attacked, and I felt unsafe when out in public. How do we skillfully practice the path when receiving real prejudice, anger, hostility, or abuse from friends, family members, or groups in society? I'm so sorry that this is happening or has happened to you, Rick. It must be very, very difficult. But I also rejoice in the fact that regardless, you have such incredible good karmic conditions to see the preciousness of the Dhamma, to see the importance of the Dhamma, and to keep practicing the Dhamma despite all these sort of really bad conditions, unfriendly conditions. So it looks like you actually have an incredibly interesting mixed karma of really bad karma in terms of the conditions, but really extreme good karma in terms of your resilience and your determination and your correct understanding of the teachings. That's why you keep holding on to them. So you can rejoice on the latter. That's probably, all our condition is always mixed. So sometimes it's actually a little bit more nuanced than yours. And I feel like actually you have this incredible reservoir of Sangha to make you really inspired. That's clearly cultivated in past lifetimes. So I would recollect your own goodness, the goodness that has brought you to have these incredibly good conditions that make you resilient to the ones that are less ideal, less helpful. The other thing that I would suggest is having compassion for the ignorance of the people that are committing such bad karma and that are making instead very difficult for themselves right now and in the future the opportunity to receive the Dhamma, to have the Dhamma, to understand the Dhamma, and to practice the Dhamma. And so since you see how beautiful and how nourishing it is for your practice, you can have compassion for them and see that unfortunately they don't have those conditions right now, and they won't have them unfortunately because they're creating obstacles for you in your practice to have them in the future. So all of that can only be grounds for compassion, for really going that's sad, that's terrible, and wish them to be happy, wish them to not be ignorant, wish them all good wishes so that they would stop harming themselves and others, in this case you. So this is what comes to mind. I don't know if the other venerables have anything. Okay. And Frank also says, can you recommend translations of the Therigatha and the Theragatha other than SC?
Sutta Central.
Other than Sutta Central, Tanisarubiko.
Well, actually, to be honest, the best translation of the Therigatha that I'm aware of is Ayasoma's.
That's very kind, Bhante, but no.
In terms of accuracy, I think it's the best. The Therigatha, I'm actually not so familiar because I just read the Therigatha in Pali. I'm actually really not familiar with what translations there are of it. To be honest, when it comes to the poetry collections, from the Khuddaka Nikaya. Most of the translations of all of them are not that great. And part of it is just because poetry is always difficult to translate well. But also, unfortunately, we haven't yet had Bhikkhu Bodhi translating these, and Bhante Sujata's translations are okay, and it's great that he translated all the suttas, so that's really lovely. But I mean, just whatever is available. If you don't know Pali, then just try to read as many different translations as you can and compare them with each other, and that will help you get a sense as to what the text is talking about.
Manny says, I'm in a WhatsApp group and wondering if I should quit for better Dharma practice. Thoughts related to the group occupies my mind daily during meditation. I don't understand.
Well, depends on what the WhatsApp group is about. Like, I mean, I know a supporter, a person who's part of my online community. He has a WhatsApp group with like 100, people that he's grouped together, to do like meditation and things like that, right? So WhatsApp is not the problem. It's what is this group about, right? Especially it's this, if the group is getting you involved in thinking about all kinds of things not related to Dhamma and taking up time that's not really worth taking up, then yeah, find another group or just let go of the app entirely. And I mean, that goes for everything, and apps and digital things and non-digital things. Paying attention to what is most important and prioritizing what's most important and beneficial over what's not.
Jay Kala says, I've been reading some of Venerable Nyanananda's sermons on papancha. They're very good. Pretty much everything from Venerable Nyanananda is pretty good. Any thoughts on papancha and the difference between it and just thinking? This actually made me remember when I had one of the first encounters with Bhante Sudaso many years ago. And at a certain point, I was accompanying him somewhere, I can't remember. But anyway, just for, I think, the purpose of small talk, I remember asking him, oh, what are you thinking about? Bhante Sudaso said, nothing. And I was like, what do you mean nothing? There must be something that you're thinking about. And so I was taking it as him not wanting to share whatever the subject that he was thinking about. And he was like, no, I'm just not thinking about anything. And it was such an odd, weird concept for me that someone could actually be awake and not think about something, that it took me a while to actually understand that it was possible, that it could be real. So to connect it to your question, I would say that 99% of thinking is papancha, to be quite frank. When you start, when you start developing mindfulness and looking at the thoughts that appear in your mind, most of it is papancha. And it just is quite delicious. So we keep on producing more and more papancha, like all the time, over and over and over and over and over again. My both of my parents, my elderly parents are here. And my mom actually has a lot of tendency towards rumination, but she shares it while it's happening. And it's so much papancha that it really tires me a lot of the times. I'm like, I don't even know, because you're probably not sharing 100% of what's going on in your mind. But the little bit that you're sharing right now, it's already like way more than what my mind can handle. And I think it's actually quite impressive, the fact that she shares it, because she gave me this insight of how much papancha also I produce. Even maybe not in that amount, but we still produce so much papancha. So I would say that most of the practice is that we start learning how to use thought skillfully and to direct it towards what is wholesome, and use it as an instrument rather than just keeping it rolling on everything. A lot of things that I thought before were extremely important, like also culture, art, etc. Well, when you delve deeply into it, it's actually also a lot of papancha. I know it's incredible that I'm saying this. I used to be very angry at Tante Sutasa 7 years ago when he would say things along those lines. But yeah, so those are my thoughts. Anything else? Okay. Could you tell me about how many different levels from layman or laywoman to nibbana? Tante Jane.
Whether you're a woman or a man, lay or ordained, there's 4 levels to awakening. Right? The first one is Sotipanna, stream enterer. Second is once returner, Sakadagami. Third is non-returner, Anagami. And fourth is Arahant, right? Fully awakened being. And the Buddha tells us that we are stuck. We are chained to the wheel of samsara by 10 fetters, by 10 chains. And as we progress down those 4 steps, we abandon ever more of those chains until the Arahant completely breaks all the chains and becomes free.
And Daniel says, commentaries list masculinity and femininity under Anidasana Patiga Rupa, invisible, intangible form included in the classification of mind objects, along with similar mind objects like cohesion, continuity, decay, levity, etc. It's not a question, but maybe Bante, do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Abhidhamma, and I've never personally delved that deeply into Abhidhamma, so I can't talk too much about it. But yeah, classifying gender identity under mental objects, I think, makes perfect sense. Also, masculinity and femininity are pretty arbitrary. You start listing what we identify as masculine or feminine. It's pretty arbitrary and varies quite dramatically from time to time and place to place. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely in the category of mental objects, mental phenomena. The other things mentioned, again, I'm not that familiar with Abhidhamma, so I can't talk too much about it.
Thank you. And Jerry was clarifying, my main harshness is a chronic headache.
Yeah, so well then that headache is a good thing to use as an object of investigation to develop your insight with, right? To understand it. And it's also a good opportunity to practice lots of metta for yourself. Right? If you have this chronic headache and it's it's causing you, it's hurting, if you have any kind of really strong thing that you're dealing with in your mind and your body, even something just like not just being tired all the time, you're not going to have the energy to even to you're going to be grumpy and you're not going to want to deal with things, and your metta is not going to be that strong. So this is something like that is a good opportunity to practice lots of metta for yourself. Sometimes I have no metta for anybody else, and so when I realize that, I just start practicing lots of metta for myself, because I can't give out metta if I don't have it for myself. So I just all I'm going to do is just keep giving it to myself, right? And so if you have a chronic headache or any kind of chronic thing that you're always going to be dealing with, it can be a vehicle for insight, and it can be a vehicle for practicing lots of self-metta.
Thank you, Bante. And Jojo says, I was wondering if one who has come to the Buddha's teachings in this life can desire to become a Buddha themselves and teach the Dhamma? Okay.
Yes, though if you've encountered the teachings of the Buddha in this life, then your option in this life is to become an arhat, what we sometimes call an anubuddha, which means somebody following a Buddha. But if you want to become a Samma Sambuddha, then you can make that determination, and it will need to wait for a future life.
Thank you. And Jojo also asks, what place does the law of attraction, manifesting desires, etc., have in the Buddhist world? It seems compatible, especially as described in the text when it comes to Devas, Buddha, etc. Well, I actually had Googled this law of attraction because it's not the first time that it comes up, but I hardly remember exactly what it is. But what I do remember is actually that the law of attraction, whoever created this law of attraction theory, as with a lot of other theories that are popular these days, they actually have taken some parts of Buddhism to create their theory. So I would say that probably a better question would be, what place does Buddhism have in the law of attraction, rather than the other way around, since Buddhism is 2,500 years old and definitely did not take anything from the law of attraction. This being said, the other thing that I also remember was that it was very much, I might be wrong, maybe correct me, that it was very much about craving things and trying to manifest them. So I don't know. It just seems something like that keeps you stuck in samsara, but maybe the other venerables remember.
It's something to the effect of like, you keep making aspirations and like I want this, or I'm going to get this, and then like supposedly the universe will make it so that you can get it. So it's very, I don't really see much of a connection to Buddhism at all, to be honest.
Yeah, actually, I did some digging into it recently, because there was a person who actually was Buddhist and had been born Buddhist and been practicing Buddhism for their entire life, and then suddenly got interested in law of attraction. Found this really puzzling. So I started reading up a bit about it, and actually I found it to be quite not only non-Buddhist, but actually anti-Buddhist in many ways. So first off, Buddhism is not about manifesting desire, it's about letting go of desire. So similarly, Buddhism teaches that all experiences are governed by karmic cause and effect. And in fact, one of the similes the Buddha gives, and this would be the exact opposite of the law of attraction theory, he gives the example of a chicken. And he says, if a chicken forms the wish, may my chickens hatch, but the chicken never actually sits on its eggs, are those chicks going to hatch? No. But on the other hand, if the chicken carefully sits on those eggs every day, but never actually once thinks, may my chickens hatch, what's going to happen? Well, the chicks are going to hatch. Even though the chicken never actually wanted them to hatch, they're still going to hatch. So this is actually the exact opposite of the law of attraction. The Buddha is saying, if you want something to happen, don't just wish really hard that it's going to happen. Instead, create the necessary causes and conditions. And the Buddha even lays out exactly how karma works in terms of what to do in order to get particular results. The Chulakama Vibhanga Sutta is my go-to sutta for this, because it's so clear. If you want to be wealthy, well, the Buddha says the way to be wealthy is to be generous. If you want to be healthy, the way to be healthy is to take care of other people. If you want to be beautiful, the way to be beautiful is to practice kindness. So the Buddha gives very clear examples of how to generate desirable circumstances. And yeah, I'm sorry, the more I look into the law of attraction, the more convinced I am that it's not Buddhist.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. I should have passed this on to you immediately. And Sudha says, Dear Venerables, if person A comes to you and says person B is terrible at a specific skill, knowing it's true, one agrees, has one slandered them in terms of 10 unwholesome karmas? Bhante J?
I don't know if I know the 10 unwholesome karmas, but in terms of the question itself, it depends on why they're doing it. Right? If they're at a monastery and they're helping, and we're trying to build the frame for a new kuti, and the person says, "Oh, I know how to do it," and then this other person's like, "Oh God, this kuti is going to fall apart if we keep going." And then you go to the abbot and say, "Bhante, please, this is not good," That's okay. But if it's like, oh, I don't like this person, let me just badmouth this person to this other person so that they get kicked out, or if it's used for a skillful purpose, then that's okay. If it's used for divisiveness, For maliciousness, for unskillful purpose, then no, it's not. You shouldn't do it.
So briefly, the 10 unwholesome karmas are 3 of body, 4 of speech, 3 of mind.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So killing, stealing, sexual misconduct are body. The 4 of speech are lying, harsh speech.
Pisunaya, parusaya, yeah.
Gotcha. So that, just from the Eightfold Path, just the negative form instead of the positive form.
I think we've gone over this before. I've just not heard of it in this framework. Yeah.
Thank you. And Julie asks, is it possible that past life karma led me to the Buddhist path? Even though I had children and started the path at 38 years old, the Buddhism seems to feel familiar. Well, absolutely, of course. That definitely we've done something really good in order to have the vipaka to encounter the teachings of the Buddha. Nothing is random in Buddhism. Actually, we work hard to not only create the conditions for us to encounter the Dhamma, but also to encounter them and have an affinity towards the Dhamma. And also within this life, like it doesn't have to be karma that we've just done in past life. So for example, personally, I feel like I encountered the Dhamma twice. And the first time I was a little bit like that the guy that encounters the Buddha after his awakening. And the Buddha's like,
may it be so, friend.
Yeah. Fully enlightened is like, all right, good for you. Sure. So that was Ayasoma when she was a layperson and first went to the her first Buddhist monastery, and I was like, yeah, this looks good, this looks great. Yeah, they're talking about enlightenment. I'm like, yeah, sure, all right, yeah, I'm sure I'm gonna be happy if I do these other things in New York City. All right, bye. But then luckily, I think actually because I did a lot of different charitable work, I think that's what created the conditions. Good karma. Did a bunch of dana that was completely unrelated to Buddhism. That created the conditions for me then to want to go to a Buddhist monastery again. And that time, like the conditions were better for me to understand the Dhamma. So absolutely, you've done something good, and you can rejoice in your past good karma, and you can keep on making good karma right now. Oh, I think I have to skip this one. AS asks, can you please provide some ways to understand and reflect on passiko? Okay.
Yeah, so this is one of the adjectives describing the Dhamma. So passiko, it's a compound of 2 words. So ehi, which means come. So it's the imperative of the verb come. And passiko means passa. Passa means to see something. So ehi passiko means that it's something which you can come and see it for yourself. So this is one of the aspects of the Dhamma, is that it's not something that you just believe in, but rather it's something that you can come and see it for yourself. So you don't need to just blindly believe that the Buddha was right, but actually if you follow his instructions, you'll see it for yourself. That's briefly what ehi passiko means.
Excellent, thank you. And Mani asks, is there any Theravada practice that can promote devotion, such as water offering in Tibetan Buddhism, that I can do at home? Jay?
I don't know what water offering is, but there are actually multiple things related to pouring of water while, when people bring dana to the monastery, they practice a water pouring ceremony, right? And it symbolizes like their generosity overflowing, like the banks of a river overflow. So there's lots of these kind of little things, and different, like, Sri Lanka might have different practices, and Thailand might have different practices, and things like that. There's a bunch. I would not consider myself adept at knowing most of them, to be honest with you, because Bhante Ji basically didn't do any of them at Bhavana. So I probably would not be the best person to ask for specifics.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most basic is to do 3 bows to your Buddha image and recite the qualities of the triple gem. One that's very common in Sri Lankan Buddhism is the Buddha Puja. So putting together a tray of like little dishes of food and beverages for the Buddha, and again, you go and respectfully offer it to the Buddha image and bow and recite devotional verses of offering. So those are also practices you can do, which might be similar to what you're looking for. So if I recall, the water offering is where you have a little tray of like little glasses of water and you offer it to the Buddha statue every morning. So I think it's actually similar to the Buddha Puja.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, just the Buddha Puja tends to be a bit more elaborate. But of course, you want to talk about elaborate. Tibetan Buddhism has the they definitely have the trademark on elaborate. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, and Jaikala, I completely agree. The best devotional practice is Buddhanussati, Dhammanussati, and Sanghanussati. Yes, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So all the rest helps to practice Buddhanussati, Dhammanussati, and Sanghanussati. So we just need to see what speaks to the heart, or what nourishes it. Maybe at the very beginning, nothing speaks to us, but as we do it, we kind of like, we start acquiring a taste for it, and it really warms the heart and it supports all the rest of the practices. So we don't have any other questions so far, unless something else pops up. And I don't know if the residents here have any comments or questions that are lingering.
I do remember a sutta where the Buddha says that the way to engage in devotion to the Buddha is to practice in the way.
To practice the Dhamma in accord with the Dhamma.
Yeah.
Sadhu, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the greatest act of devotion is to purify your mind. But the ceremonial acts of devotion can be a great way to remind you and keep you focused on the path. So they're not to be swept aside. If they're done correctly and with the right intention and motivation, then they can be a powerful support to one's practice.
Great. All right. Well, there's no other questions that are popping up. So I think maybe for tonight, that will be all. Oh, no, actually, see, as soon as we say this, then Mani asks, to reduce bodily desires, someone said one should meditate on a dead body to create aversion. How exactly can this be done without access to a corpse? Anybody wants to take this?
Well, first off, the person was probably referring to the Asubha practices, but the purpose of these practices is not to create aversion. So aversion is an unwholesome mind state. So the purpose is not to start hating bodies, but rather the purpose of these practices is to understand the body as it actually is. So this body is in fact a rotting piece of meat. And we tend to get fixated on the illusory beauty of the body. Or conversely, we tend to get fixated on the illusory ugliness of the body. But actually, a body is really what it is. It's just a bloody piece of meat that's capable of moving around. So it's not gross and it's not beautiful. That's really all it is. So there are practices, and you can find all of these in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. There's practices on feeling the different internal components of the body. There's practices on contemplating various stages of decomposition of dead bodies and so on. And again, the purpose here is just to know bodies as they are, without either desire or aversion. And as for doing it without access to a corpse, go online. We live in the era of the internet where you can find all the pictures and videos you could ever hope for of internal organs and decomposing bodies. You can find everything you want. But remember that the purpose of this is not to produce aversion or disgust or hatred. If it's having any of that effect, stop. immediately stop because something's gone sideways. And Daniel says, you definitely have access to a corpse. You're sitting in one. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Exactly. Also, I think the best way to the suba for me has always been recollecting past partners. Well, they're past for a reason, There was, once the honeymoon is over, then you start seeing how they stink and the unattractiveness of everything. It's like really there. The very beginning, knowing personal habits. So you start recollecting how your mind worked, like at the very beginning, there was the honeymoon. So you were only doing suba practice. Everything was beautiful. And then after the honeymoon is over, everything is asuba. But yeah, it's not that one is only beautiful or disgusting, but rather there is a combination of both, and one wants to have the full picture. But usually we tend to focus on the glitter instead of the feces. So that's why the Buddha essentially puts an emphasis on looking at the sign of mark of the non-beautiful. And Rick asks, Bante J, can you share some reflections on the nuance between using food for medical needs versus using in for unskillful emotional comfort?
Well, to know the intention of why you're using the food, you have to really develop that mindfulness, really develop satipatthana, you have to really kind of be able to know your mind and know when, Mara is deceiving you, and know when, you're actually doing something. Oh, okay, no, this is actually a skillful thing, right? You really, your intentions go really, really deep. And sometimes it can be really hard, because if there is, like, for example, like, I have various, medical things or whatever, and I'll think, and I'll notice that my mind will use that to its advantage to get what it wants. Like, oh, but you're, this is the reason. So now you can have that. And if I'm, mindful, and if I'm, aware enough, I say, oh, no, I see you. Right? I see you, Mara. Like they always, like the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis. No, I see you. Right? Of course, then, Mara comes back around from another angle, and he might get me then. But it's about to even be able to know your, what your intention is. You have to have the practice, the mindfulness to really be able to see it deeply, right? You can see so between using it for medical needs and using it for unskillful emotional comfort. So a big example of this is, are you not hungry, but you're going for the Cheetos or the croissant or whatever, right? Is it like, has there been a mind state that has arisen of depression, of, an unpleasant experience, and now you're trying to escape it, right? If you're able to kind of practice being with it, just, Buddha says, Kanti paramang tapotitika, patient endurance is the best meditation or the best practice, right? So if you're able to have the patient endurance to be with it, then you're able to see, okay, trauma has arisen or some unpleasant thing has arisen. I really want that food, right? Or I really want that alcohol or that sex or whatever it is, whatever I'm using to drown that unpleasantness with a pleasant feeling. You're able to, if you have that endurance and that mindfulness, then you can see, I don't really need this food. I need to nourish myself in some other way right now. Maybe I need to give myself lots of metta, lots of compassion, right? Maybe I need to try to find another way to deal with this trauma or this unpleasantness without resorting to something simple and easy, and that's going to, in the long run, be detrimental to me. Not easy. Not easy. Like, I can remember very specifically, and I was probably a samanera. Whatever. Hey, maybe in a past life, who knows?
Surprise.
I think I was great. A samanera, and I can remember I was in a very, very bad, like very kind of depressive, very rough place, and I remember myself vividly going for the kitchen to get like a granola bar or something like that. And I can remember like trying to say, no, we don't need that. Like, I'm trying to enforce my will on my own body, and I couldn't. My body was going to the kitchen to get that granola bar. And it was such a shocking experience that I was like, I have no control over this. This is really scary, but it was just, I was so clearly mindful and aware that whatever in my body and whatever part of my mind wanted that, whatever, it was going for it. Even though there's a part of me that was like, no, I don't need this. Let's not do this. Right. And that's because from a young age, like, even there's a part of me that's like, if I don't have to eat lunch with other people, like, there's a part of me that kind of wants to, let me, do something else while I'm eating, right? Like, because I used to sit on the couch watching TV and just eating pretzels, just, watching Discovery Channel or whatever. There'd be like a surgery on. You'll be eating I just eat. Whether when I was happy, I ate. When I was sad, I ate. When I was indifferent, I ate. Why not?
This is great.
And so I built up those habits, and really understanding that and seeing that is very important. So you have to have any ability, to have any power over those habits. You need to have strong mindfulness, strong awareness, strong, already developing the practice of never lying to yourself and never accepting any lie that arises in your mind. Right? Something says, I see you, Mara, or I see you, whatever. Whatever you want to think about it. Right? I see this. I am not accepting this. Right? It's like, you worked hard. Why don't you just have a little bit extra? Just go get that snack or whatever. Nope. Right? It's not easy. Right? These things are not easy, especially if you have food issues. Not easy. Even though I've been, a monk, and I will have to say I'm surprised that my food stuff has been pretty good in the last year. I'm kind of actually surprised. I'm happily surprised. And I think the 1 meal a day, the system that I've been doing, has actually been a big help for that. Surprisingly enough, counterintuitively enough. But I still have food issues, right? And they're still there. And I still would like to just be able to eat whatever I want and not have to worry about nutrition or whatever. If I just have my meal for today is going to be croissants and Cheetos or something. So obviously I would like for that. Yeah, my mind, sure, I can just eat whatever I want. But no, obviously I know that, doing that just causes me suffering, right? So so you reflect every day. You reflect, this food is being used for my body, and I don't. I was telling actually Samanera Mentico this. Like, I actually, if I'm by myself, I don't do like the whole I'm gonna reflect on what I'm eating thing before I start eating. Because usually what happens is I can be so pious and reflect, Sangha, yoni, so, and then the minute a food hits my mouth, my mindfulness can go out. So I tend to actually take the first bite, and then that's when I start reflecting. Okay, now I'm only eating this food for X, Y, and Z. Because it's just observing my own food issues. So I know that, like, I have to make sure that I'm right on the ball the minute I take that first bite, because I could lose my mindfulness and then the food's done. And, you know, I would hear my mom growing up, or my dad's like, did you even taste what you ate? And I'd be like, yeah, I guess I did. It just went real quick. Right? So it's reflecting. I don't really need this croissant. It's not really much nutrition. I should have, you know, this. I don't need this or that. I should have more of this. And like really kind of focusing on what I really need as opposed to what I want, and having the mindfulness to kind of be able to stick with it has helped me to be able to try to eat better. And also, you know, eating the one meal a day also really puts that mindset in me. Like, I only have one meal and I need this nutrition and that nutrition. I'm not, you know, I can't just waste it on getting silly things, right? Like, so having that like kind of limited option has been, actually, this is the first time this has popped in my head, like trying to think of but that pressure does actually help me to make sure that I choose more wisely too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Bhante. I will second, especially the last reflection. Definitely, you know, these restrictions, that's why they're so compassionate from the Buddha. We think that we're missing out, for example, on the 8 precepts if we're lay people. But actually, yeah, when I was a lay person, I remember once I was on the 8 precepts, wow, it created those conditions. Also to reflect, wait, I only have, you know, this amount of time, and if I'm lucky, it's, you know, breakfast and lunch. Sometimes you're not lucky and you only have lunch. So either 1 or 2 meals, and, you know, maybe a couple of days you can pick whatever you like to eat, but then after a while your body really starts communicating that it needs nourishment. So you're like, well, maybe I actually need these beans rather than the cake, because the cake will make me full, and I won't actually have the nutrition. I will also get very drowsy. My brain won't function properly, etc., etc. So you start relating to food, not for fun, not for pleasure, but for the sustenance of this body. So once again, all of these are gifts that the Buddha gives us. So the precepts are gifts so that we can actually even see these tendencies of mind. For example, before Buddhism, I had no idea that there was any problem whatsoever to relate to food unskillfully, because literally the only thing that people tell you, okay, maybe health wise, you should be eating this or that, but, you know, if you don't have like particular like strong health concerns, then it's like, oh well, you might be overweight. And I used to remember, oh, I'm not vain. Oh, who cares? I can be a little bit chubby. Like, it's such a quick fix too. You know, we don't tend to stigmatize, for example, overeating as much as we tend to stigmatize other types of drugs. But like, food is a nice quick fix that is always readily available. And Kim asks, I like the idea of contemplating death. Looking at corpses, not so much. Isn't the point to realize impermanence?
I mean, that's part of it. But one of the important things about contemplating death is to come to accept that death is completely natural, and therefore to relinquish one's fear of death. But also to reflect that our time in this life is relatively short, and death tends to have a side effect of amnesia. So while we have this life with conditions to practice the Dhamma, we should make the most of it, because we don't know if we're going to have similarly good conditions in future lives. So reflecting on death is also to bring up a sense of urgency, the importance of practicing in this life. And if you say you have a problem with looking at corpses, then you should probably look at some corpses so that you stop having a problem with it. If you have a strong resistance, then look at that. An awakened being can look at anything in samsara and not be disturbed because they know it's just part of samsara.
Thank you, Bante. And Rick also asks, can you share some reflections on the nature of the practicing the gradual path versus having a sudden breakthrough? Would you like to also address that?
Yeah, so we practice the gradual path, and that creates the conditions to occasionally have breakthroughs. But most of our practice tends to be slow growth. Sudden breakthroughs are uncommon, but they're the result of having practiced the gradual path for long periods of time.
Yeah, well, the Buddha gives the simile, right? Just the simile of the ocean shelf. Just as the ocean shelf gradually slows down and then there's a sudden drop to gnosis, just as how the practice goes. It's gradual and then there's the sudden drop.
And Manny says, what all can I do to convince my son to practice Buddhism when he's too lazy to practice spirituality and is addicted to social media and friends? Well, I will say something that is unpopular on the demographic under 18, and that is, if your son is underage, force him to go to the temple. Because literally, I mean, nobody who's a teenager will, like, unless they have like an extremely good quantity amount of incredible good karma from past lives, will think that that's where they're going to find happiness. I mean, it took me quite a long time to think that there was, to even realize that there were Buddhist temples and that I could find anywhere there by myself, so if someone had forced me, maybe I wouldn't have listened the first couple of times, but then after a while, something kind of seeps in. And maybe you don't use that information straight away, but you actually can, there can come a time where it's useful for you afterwards. Actually, we have a lot of like 20 something or 30 something Buddhist friends that were born Buddhist in Asian families, and they were sharing, how it was like dreadful for a lot of them to go to the temple, especially if they weren't in Asia, but they were bored and they would rather do like something else with their friends. And they're like, why do I have to go in this place where these like weird people dressed weird, odd, and practicing this religion that nobody's practicing? And it's like, whatever, weird, awful, I don't like this, I don't want this, it has to stop, blah, 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 like for 10 years straight. And then when they're in their 20s and kind of going through all the dukkha, they're like, hey, wait, dukkha. Oh, I remember hearing such and such monastic talk about suffering and the cause of suffering and the end of suffering and the way out of suffering, and meditation. Oh yeah, I remember I used to practice that when I was a child. And then they start coming to the temple out of their own accord, seeing the value of it and actually intentionally practicing the Dhamma and having, experiencing the cessation of suffering. Maybe not the complete cessation of suffering, but definitely some cessation of suffering as they're practicing. So yeah, if he's underage, by all means, force him right there every Sunday, every Saturday and Sunday, maybe every moment that you can actually force him to go to the temple. And if he's not underage, but also if he's underage, lead by example. So literally practice the teachings and inspire your son. Show him that there is another way out, another way to live, another way to be. So yeah, do the work and inspire others. And Frank says, as my practice has progressed, eating meat has acted as a spur to practice. Okay, there's a sense that a living sentient being has died for my sustenance, and I have a responsibility to not waste that gift.
Is that a question? That's
no,
not really
it's just a comment.
Yeah. Do you want to address it?
And I wouldn't use that as an excuse to eat meat. But if it's necessary for you to eat meat for the sake of your health, then yeah, it is important to reflect on it. The Buddha said that if we choose to eat meat, then we should reflect on what it is. In other words, you should remind yourself that a sentient being died so that you could eat this food. The Buddha says if you eat meat, then you should reflect on what it is. But don't use this as an excuse to eat more meat. Like, oh, therefore I should eat meat 3 times a day so that I can remind myself of this all the time. No, that's just justifying your defilements. But if it's necessary for your health to eat meat, then you should reflect on it in this way, as you say.
Thank you. And actually, Elena has a follow-up to an earlier question. That is sudden insight versus the gradual path similar to the contrast between the monastic path versus the householder path?
No. Whether you're a monastic or a householder, your practice is still gradual practice with occasional breakthroughs. It's the same. But for most people, monastic practice, if you have the right conditions for it, monastic practice tends to be a bit quicker. But some people, they're really not, monastic life is not for them in this life, and it's better for them to just focus on practicing as a householder as best they can.
There's no such thing as unconditional sudden insight. Meaning that there's not just like, oh, I don't know anything about Buddhism or spirituality. Oh, I'm awakened, right? That doesn't exist. Unconditional spiritual insight means that you put no conditions. You did nothing for it to arise, right? So what I'm saying is there's no such thing as that, right? It's not just stuff arises. You actually put in the work and you follow the path, and because of that, when causes and conditions are right, then insights arise.
Great, thank you. Sud asked, dear Venerables, how should one understand here in Ottapa in terms of day-to-day life? How should a lay beginner Buddhist practice these in day-to-day life? Well, the Buddha talks about Hiriyottapa as the guardians of the world. So Hiriyottapa, Venerable Body, translates it as shame and
is it moral? No,
moral shame and
dread. Yes.
Moral shame and moral dread.
Also as shame and fear of wrongdoing.
Yes, shame and fear of wrongdoing, which at Empty Club we constantly debate on well, actually not constantly, because it's been a while since we've debated that, but there was a time where like there was a fierce debate on the accuracy of these translations. And so I'm in the camp of, I really like these words, actually. I think they're very accurate and they speak very much to what we should be experiencing. Yeah, like when we are thinking, for example, the idea of now stabbing my spiritual companions or anyone in this world, I am just horrified at the thought of it, but in a healthy way. I am like, oh, I'm afraid to actually harm a sentient being. Now that I have mindfulness, if I go out, I like look at my whereabouts and see, hey, is there like, you know, maybe little ant when I'm walking. Actually, also, I always pay attention if there are sentient beings. So it's not necessarily that I'm in, like we can describe that, oh, there's a fear someone is assaulting me, but rather it's circumspection, like a sort of like wanting to not harm others. So it's obviously very, very morally informed. Maybe there's a better word than fear, but sometimes we also say that I'm afraid that I hurt you, for example. No, don't we say that in English language? And that's wholesome. It's not like, oh, I'm afraid I can't, like, I'm having agitation and I can't sleep at night, but rather I'm afraid that I did something wrong. Like, I hope I didn't do that. And also the dread of doing something that is really, really terrible to others. So in all of that, I feel like that's extremely wholesome. And when we see people that are serial killers, like for example the ones that intentionally do mass shootings, you see how essentially they are completely devoid of any type of fear of wrongdoing, of like, you can say conscience, but I would say that that's a little bit too subtle to catch this. And definitely they're deprived of hiriyottapa because they have not intentionally preserved it. They have not intentionally seen the value of it. So it comes to a place where you just become, I think, pathologically crazy, which leads to a hell realm, both in this life and in other lifetimes.
I'd like to hear, because I don't know if I'm familiar with this little debate. I'd like to hear Bante's explanation of these words.
Yeah, I like the translation conscience. Actually, I think both words fit under the English word conscience. If I have to divide them up, then something like conscience and consideration, or conscience and concern. Those are what I like. I don't like the words fear and shame because those both have a very negative connotation in the English language, at least for me. And fear of wrongdoing. Arhants don't have fear, but they do have hiriyottapa. Arhants don't have dread, but they do have hiriyottapa. So I like conscience and consideration. But ultimately, again, the point here is that one has an awareness of right and wrong and a natural tendency to avoid doing what's wrong and instead to do what's right. That's what hiriyottapa means. One knows what is morally wrong and one avoids doing it. That's hiriyottapa. So I like to just call it conscience, though this is an old debate which we haven't had in a while. I think we already drew the battle lines and realized that we weren't going to be shifting them anytime soon.
I think we agreed to disagree. We also realized that perhaps also our divergent points of views have to do with the weight and significance that certain words have based on our cultural background. So usually words like shame and fear and dread are, I seem to understand, in the Protestant sort of framework, words that are very charged and
yeah, it's like the Catholic guilt or the Jewish guilt or the like various people who kind of grew up with the guilt of you better do this or else, and so I think a lot of Westerners don't like those words per se. So this is why translators have tried to use various more like with Bhikkhu Bodhi adding the adjective like moral, to try to point towards what it's trying to say.
Yeah, it's very interesting because had it been moral guilt, I would have probably had a different reaction to it than moral shame, because in Catholicism, we put a lot of emphasis on guilt. So yeah, guilt, I feel you. I'm like, guilt, no. But shame, I'm like, I don't know. Apparently in Italy, we shame people a lot, like as a regular thing. So it's not that yeah, my mom used to say almost a lot of the time, you should be ashamed of yourself. I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I do think that is actually, though, I do think that those are qualities that actually are important. I think in some ways, in a lot of things going on in the culture, there probably needs to be a bit more shame.
Exactly.
But it's about like the way I kind of view hiriyottapa in general, it's a reflection of not wanting to do anything bad because you understand the consequences, both in terms of what it can do, to harm yourself and others, but also, as Buddha is very always talking about, when somebody does something, the Buddha's like, it would have probably been better that you died utterly horribly right now than to have done that act, because it's going to be worse for you later, right? So like, if you kind of have this idea like, oh God, if I do this, like, I'm going to the Naraya hell. You're like, well, yeah, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. It's not worth it, right? So it is this kind of, and of course, obviously, even Christians, former, they're like, oh my God, you're going to be afraid of hell. You just like the priests say X, Y, and Z, but I think it's that that healthy realization of the benefits of not doing bad things.
That's actually a pretty good translation. It's just a little bit too long to fit neatly in translations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we need definitions maybe rather than words.
And actually, Sangha is a word where you need an entire paragraph to translate it.
I love Samvegas. That's a urgency. But
Okay, we still have a few more questions.
And our friend here says, what does mind do different than brain or vice versa?
I tend to think of the brain as a physical instrument through which the mind interacts with reality, with physical reality. So similar to how, say, if you need to put in a screw, then you use a screwdriver. And a screwdriver is an instrument that you use in order to put the screw in. So in the same way, the brain is the physical instrument that the mind uses to interact with the body. I might be totally wrong, but that's how I usually think about it.
It's just like all the others. It's the senses, right? Like you inhabit this body, and part of this biological machine is you have eyes and ears and this is how you experience things. And so the brain is like that part of the body that is the central functioning of understanding those things. So the brain is just one aspect of this physical body that the mind uses to act and to do its thing.
Yeah, also what I find very helpful is that actually, apparently, if you ask the average Westerner, where's the mind, they will go like this. And the average person from the East will go like this, which is the heart. I'm pointing at the heart. So it's quite interesting because someone else would have asked, what does the heart do different than the brain, and vice versa. So we have so many implicit assumptions. We have so many ideas of what the mind is, where it's located. And I think that Buddhist practice should focus more on uncovering those biases that we have, rather than focusing too much about the workings of the body.
That's a good point, because when I'm giving talks, when I'm teaching, I will notice that when I say the mind, I'll point to my head, and I've been actively trying to not do that, because I actually don't think it's really that skillful to try to force the mind into any one spot of the body per se. So I'm trying to actively not do that. But it's the conditioning.
Exactly. But so insightful. I remember that up until realizing that other people thought, we're pointing at the heart for the mind, it had never occurred to me to question why I thought the mind was here. Mm-hmm. It is so interesting. And Hasant asks, if we're only the five aggregates, what about formless beings who have no rupa or sensations? Or is it that the five have no self, not that the five are all we are? Ante?
Well, the five definitely have no self. So the five khandhas is 5 ways that we can experience reality. But the Buddha does mention that there are these realms of existence that we call the arupa loka, because beings in those realms have no physical form at all, no physical bodies at all. So such beings have only 4 khandhas. They only have the 4 mental khandhas. So those are 4 aspects to our experience, but they're not who we are. They're just things that we can experience, ways that we can experience reality.
Great. Oh, fun fact that Frank says, something worth contemplating. There are actually neurons in the human heart.
Yeah, there's neurons in many, many places in the body.
I didn't know.
Yeah, cool. It's like a distributed system in a way. Yeah.
That's very cool. And Rick says, what guidance did the Buddha give for monks and lay people for cleaning and caring for the body and home? I have been struggling to keep up as my chronic illness has progressed. Thank you. For cleaning and caring for the body. Well, the only thing that pops into my mind right now is that we're supposed to cut our nails short.
Well, we're also
brushing teeth.
We're also supposed to trim our nose hairs. It's actually a Vinaya rule that we have to trim our nose hairs.
Well, bhikkhunis have it easy. Or
you don't have nose hairs?
No.
What?
Well, at least doesn't grow like it grows with. It's called good karma. We don't have extra proliferation of hair that goes everywhere.
Let's see. Well, we're supposed to leave our clean our room and put it in order before leaving the monastery.
Yes.
So that if somebody else needs to use the room while we're away, then it's clean and usable. But yeah, I mean, if you have a chronic illness that makes it difficult for you to keep up with these things, then you have a chronic illness that makes it difficult to keep up with these things. That's not a moral failing. It just means that you're sick. And when you're sick, it's hard to keep up with these things. So do the best you can, but keep in mind that these are not moral issues. You're not going to hell because you didn't clean your room today. You're not going to hell because you haven't trimmed your fingernails in a few days. Go ahead.
They can be good. They can be good anchors for kind of keeping a discipline. Like if you're like a part, like, oh, I'm just so feeling horrible and I'm depressed and I'm just going to sit here and not do it. You can say, no, well, I need to brush my teeth, or I need to do this, I need to do that. So it can be kind of an anchor to keep you on a schedule and keep you doing things so you're not mired in your suffering. The other thing it can be is they can be like an early warning sign. Like for instance, like with my depression over the years, what I've noticed is that the first things to go are like regular things like wanting to brush my teeth. Like I don't want to brush my teeth. I don't give a crap about my, when I notice that like my normal daily routines are starting to fall apart, then that's a sign for me that there's something going on with my mind. And I say, oh, early warning sign. And then I observe my mind and I see if this is the case. So those little things can be a good anchor and can be a beneficial thing. So to try to do those even though you're dealing with lots of issues.
So we're running out of time, so we should do the last few questions quickly.
There's few.
Yeah, they all popped up right now. Tibetan first says, in Buddhism, there could be any types of karma, right? But why there is specific rules for everything fundamentally? I don't understand.
So it's not that there's rules, but rather that the Buddha is describing cause and effect relationships. So if you plant tomato seeds in your garden and then you're shocked that no roses grow, well, why are you surprised? You planted tomato seeds. So this is why the Buddha describes different types of karma. He's just saying there's different types of seeds that you can plant in your mind, and those seeds will produce corresponding results. So it's like the laws of physics. Like you throw a ball up in the air and you're like, why did this ball suddenly have to fall out of the sky? It's like, well, because you threw it up in the air a few seconds ago. That's why. So the Buddha's just describing the laws of the universe. He's just describing how reality functions, the cause and effect relationships of reality. That's all.
And Rick says, how do we skillfully interact with people in the USA who are actively refusing to acknowledge facts or the truth? Well, I mean, understanding first and foremost that 99.9% chance that we're not going to change their ways of looking at the subject matter. And yeah, there was actually, I think, Bodhisattva to a certain point when he was talking about fake news or people, having their kind of ideas and trying to throw them different conspiracy theories, throwing them at you. It's like, we actually don't really need to engage with all of that. Like, it's not that we have to engage with every single person who has kind of like a lunatic idea out there. Sometimes we can actually just not engage. So I actually kept that in mind because it can be very strong, the tendency, to go there and like, no, hey, you're wrong. I am right. And then it kind of like gets into, especially on Facebook, these like endless debates where nobody ever changed their mind on Facebook, right? Facebook comments or whatever, nor really actually that much in real life, unless we're talking about two people who really earnestly having a conversation rather than a match where I'm going to convince you and you're going to convince me. So if we are actually genuinely interested then in knowing, understanding the point of view of the other person, then maybe we can put aside our understanding of the truth and start that investigation, like heart to heart. And then asking questions that are not like, oh, I'm going to ask them this question to make sure that, I find their weak spot and so I can rebuke their thesis or whatever. So with that intention of like basically having the moral high ground or being, superior, but rather just with honest interest, like, really, why is that so? And so maybe actually, who knows? We'll find out that we were the conspiracy theorists all along. Who knows?
Very good. Very good.
We thought it was the other person. Or instead, actually, it is a person who has a conspiracy theory, but they won't feel challenged and attacked. And maybe that will create an opening for them to actually investigate their own mind. And so, yeah, I would say we have to see if we're ready ourselves to have that kind of interaction. Okay. And second, Jojo says, are those beings in the Pure Lands or the formless realms there without knowledge of the Dhamma, but will inevitably reach Nirvana? Okay.
Well, I don't know that there's a lot of specifics said about exactly what the beings in the formless realms are able to be doing per se. But let's see, are those beings in the Pure Lands forms are without knowledge of the Dhamma? Well, as far as I know, if you're in the pure abodes, then you're a non-returner, as far as I know. So you're going to become awakened one way or the other. As far as being in the formless realms, you could have been in the formless realm your last life. Are you about to be awakened in this life? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think that really has anything to do necessarily with knowledge of the Dhamma. I think it's, I don't know enough about the mind of a being in the formless realms to speak much more than that. But to me, I would just understand it as another form of existence in samsara. And whatever existence that can help me understand the Dhamma to free myself from samsara is a good existence. I don't know.
Great. Thank you, Bante. Last question, maybe Bante Sudaso. Do you need mastery of the jhana to go up to the Brahma realms after this life?
No. The Brahma realms the lower Brahma realms are connected with the cultivation of the Brahma Viharas. So metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. This is the key to being reborn in the Brahma realms. The higher Brahma realms are said to require experience with jhana. And the formless realms require experience with the formless attainments. But the first few layers of the Brahma realm are dependent upon practicing Brahma Viharas, not upon the jhanas. And of course, one needs to also have a giant stockpile of good karma. That's actually the most important component. Okay.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you to all the venerables, and thank you to all of you for asking all these good, interesting questions. It's really so refreshing to see so many people interested in learning the teachings of the Buddha. So please keep them coming. That's the whole sort of juice of Monk Chat is questions coming from all of you. And you can ask those questions every Friday at 7:30 p.m. New York City time. And also you can join in our weekly live streams at 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And if you're around at the Cloud Monastery here in New Jersey, you're welcome to come and say hello to our different programs, meditation programs, Dhamma programs that we have. And you're also welcome to come here for a residency if you're interested in living like a monastic with the monastics for a period of time. Just send us an email. So we can end the evening with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. You be well and happy. May all good things come to you.